You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
So excited you could join me here today for this Total Wellness Tuesday show, where we're going to be going over the caffeine cortisol connection and whether there are actual benefits to drinking caffeine or coffee or tea, and how that affects the nervous system, your hormones, your ability to burn body fat, as well as your immune system. So we're going to be looking at all of those things today. We're actually going to talk about who it's good for, who it's not good for, and also include the Ayurvedic doshas or body types as well. Really excited to bring this to you because if you look at caffeine, you can look at it actually as a supplement. And we know that all foods, we can look at foods as supplements as well, but if we look at all foods, all supplements, everything in nature, we can always say that there can be benefit to everything that is natural. However, there are also consequences when used improperly. And that means based on your bioindividuality, does using this supplement, such as caffeine, make sense? Because in a lot of instances, it does. And I will actually recommend it in rare instances in my practice. However, for many people, it can be absolutely detrimental to reducing anxiety, to reducing blood pressure, cortisol, stress in general, body fat, any of these things. We're going to talk about all of them today, but I want you to understand why. So you can read an article and you can say coffee's bad, or you can read an article and say coffee's good. Here's the thing that we do. Essentially, you read an article and then you look at the end, what are they promoting? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, coffee is so good for you. And like, oh, well, this company sells coffee. Of course it's good for you, right? And then this company over here, they're selling herbal tea, and so they're telling you how bad caffeine is. And that's what we do. And it's a shame because we put marketing before everything else and selling something before everything else. So what we do is we talk negatively, and I've seen this a lot lately with herbs. So people are saying how bad stevia is or how bad that is. First of all, stevia is a natural plant. It's always been a natural plant. But when we start to put it into a lab and then we basically pervert its natural constituents, it could harm the human body. The other thing is when we bring it into a study with lab rats that might weigh a half a pound or so, and then we give them about their weight in stevia for that, and then of course there's going to be negative consequences, and we say, oh, look, stevia or you can do this for any product, like literally any product. When you take your body weight in that product, of course there's going to be negative consequences. The same goes for caffeine. A lot of the negative dosages that we're looking at, or the negatives, are actually above 2.5 cups to 3 cups. So that's when we start to get into severe negatives with a lot of people. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means somewhere over 300 milligrams of caffeine per day. I've done shows on exactly how much caffeine is in a Dunkin' Donuts coffee, which we have here in New England, how much is in a Starbucks coffee. I've kind of gone through the line of Red Bull. So check that out on previous shows. I'll see if I can link it up today. As always, I always try to see if I can link up previous shows in the podcast. But you can go to stephencabral.com/podcasts and just type in caffeine. And you'll actually see my previous podcast and any weekend host call questions that I've answered on caffeine. So I will try to get that for you specifically. But today, for the actual notes for this show, go to stephencabral.com/921. I believe today's episode 921. We'll get that for you by the end of the show. So what I want to talk about, though, is I just said about 2.5 to 3 cups is where it seems to hit the tipping point for most people, where it starts to become a big negative. Now, there are few studies, I will say, that having more than 3 cups per day can be actually protective in terms of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, those types of things. And that's because caffeine is actually a brain stimulant. We'll talk about that in the future. Actually, not in the future, but later on the show, of how it increases acetylcholine and other neurotransmitters, which are actually great for the brain as well. So we'll go over that because I want to bring you both sides. As always, in the Cabral Concept, there will be no direct, like, oh, I'm only going to talk about this because I want to promote that. That's not how it's ever going to happen. I'm going to show you both sides of it because first and foremost, I run a functional medicine practice. My job is to help people get well. It's not to sell anything. It's to simply help people get well. Because if I've done my job right, well, people get well within about 4 months, 3 to 4 months or so, right? We put them on a maintenance protocol, which might last another 3 months or so. And then after that, they're really good to go. They've learned the proper way of eating. They've learned the proper way of exercising. And then we might check in with them maybe once a year or twice a year, just to run follow-ups or whatever needs to be done. That's the whole point. Like the point is to help people get in great shape, get well, get over what type of dis-ease they have in their body. And the last part is to work on anti-aging so that we make sure if things start to decline in the future, we don't let them decline. We bring them right back up so there will be no dis-ease in that person's future. That's what it's all about, of course. So again, today's show notes are at stephencabral.com/921. I want to get right into the show. And right before I do that, do keep in mind that for some people, even one sip of caffeine can create anxiety, increased heart rate, panic attacks, things that obviously we do not want. So do understand, for some people, knowing your body is very, very important, and it trumps all sorts of research that you could read out there. I have a friend, any caffeine at all, almost immediate panic attack within about 15 to 20 minutes. Heart rate speeds up. Now he knows that caffeine affects him in this way because he's made the connection, but so many people don't, right? They're blaming it on, well, maybe they're blaming it on gluten, or maybe they're blaming it on their smoothie in the morning. Who knows? But what I can tell you is this, is by using variables in your own life, by putting things in and taking things out, you can begin to see what works well for you. So sometimes it is the dosage. Again, for some people, it's just a sip, whether in that Vata-based state, right? If you're a Vata dosha, or you're not a Vata dosha, maybe you're in a Kapha body type or endomorph body type. But if you're in a Vata-based state because of high levels of stress at work or with family, whatever it might be, again, you're in a Vata-based state, and caffeine then can stimulate you too much, leading to all the negative consequences we're going to be talking about today. So I want to talk about the good, I want to talk about the bad, I want to talk about a lot of the ugly out there with caffeine, and then we'll find out, again, the right dosage for you, if any, because oftentimes there is something in the middle that works really, really well. That's how most supplements work in general, right? There's a middle dose that works fantastically well. Not too little, not too much. All right, so here's what we talk about. When we take in caffeine, I'm going to probably interchange this a lot with coffee today because coffee is the number one supplement in the world. A lot of people say coffee is not a supplement. It's a food. Well, sure, coffee is a food. It's a bean. But what we do is we extract that. We turn it into a liquid that is caffeinated. And again, I know some people drink decaf. Decaf has about 13 milligrams or so of caffeine itself. So still has a little bit of caffeine. If we're talking about caffeine in general, just for a moment, green tea has about 42 milligrams to 44 milligrams, right around there. A shot of espresso has somewhere around 70 to 77 milligrams. A small Dunkin' Donuts coffee has about 144 milligrams. A small, again, we're talking about a tall at Starbucks, that small cup, that has about 272. So you can see how high the caffeine is on a Starbucks coffee. Really, really impressive, right? And that's why it's so addictive. You go up to a venti, I'm not a venti, but a grande, you're looking at 400 milligrams. That is a shot. That is a shot of adrenaline, which we're going to talk about right now. So let's get into it. So essentially what caffeine does is it stimulates something that I wrote about in my book, The Rain Barrel Effect. It's almost never talked about, right? The rain barrel effect is never talked about either. But there's something that we're missing in conventional medicine, as well as naturopathic medicine, as well as overall natural health. If you had to choose one way in which I help people get well in my practice and that I want to teach to this coming fall when we begin our certification, it's this. It's the neuroendoimmune system, or the neuroendocrine immune system. What does that mean? Well, here's exactly how it works. It's your nervous system interacting with your endocrine system, which means your hormones, which then affects your immune system. Okay, so we always think about getting unwell as our immune system, and I agree. But your immune system only becomes over or understimulated based on other factors, such as the nervous system and hormones, and every once in a while, just directly from a virus or bacteria. But it's also what happens during that part. So think of this. Every time you ingest caffeine, it affects your nervous system. What they've done with studies, they've seen that when you ingest caffeine, just at rest, sitting at your desk, we'll say, right? Or just sitting at your kitchen table, when you take in that caffeine, it brings you to the point of a high stress state. Think about slamming on your brakes when you almost hit someone, right? That's what it's doing, even though you're at rest, even though you're sitting there. But internally, what's happening is you are beginning to increase respiration rate, heart rate's increasing, blood pressure's increasing. The body's secreting two main hormones to make all these things happen. That's epinephrine and that's cortisol. So basically adrenaline, you get a shot of adrenaline, which increases that respiration, right? Brings more oxygen in, increases the heart rate so we can get ready in that fight or flight. And it's increasing blood pressure to start to constrict, to get ready to run, right? Or run away, right? To run after, to run away, the fight or flight, or freeze, right? So we look at those specific things. And this is why, though, in some people, it can increase anxiety, increase panic attack, because we put ourselves in a stress-based situation. Again, it's oftentimes dosage. Half a cup's fine for some people, 1 cup, too much, right? So we look at that. I'm going to talk about that more towards the end of the show. But then once the adrenaline starts getting pumping, once that norepinephrine is freed up, the hypothalamus getting in our brain, telling our pituitary gland, okay, we're under stress, here we go, let's produce that epinephrine. And then afterwards we say, okay, time for the adrenal cortex. It's the inner part of the adrenal glands. They sit right on top of those kidneys, right behind in the lower of the lower back on each side. And what happens is we produce cortisol, and then cortisol says, great, now it's go time. I'm going to ask the liver, I'm going to ask something to free up some glucose, to free up some sugar. And then that's going to allow me to have a fast fuel source. This is what a lot of people who are just surface level keto promoters don't understand, is that when you're in fight or flight, you are basically asking your body to be in a hyperactive state, and it needs glucose. It is not going to burn ketones in the same way, nor body fat. So when people say, oh, you have to become fat adapted, yes, but not in fight or flight. It's not how it works. So you need immediate fuel. So again, if you're doing a keto diet, actually coffee or caffeine would not be a good idea. There's many reasons for this as well, and it's actually because caffeine affects your liver. And anything that affects the liver on a keto-based diet is not a good idea because your liver actually has to work much, much harder on a keto-based diet, and that's because it is producing ketones, right? It's also dealing with the acid-based waste of the ketone-based production. We'll talk about that on a future show. Again, I'm not pro or against anything. There's a time and place for everything. There's a time and place for keto. The average everyday person? No, not the time and place, right? But there's a time and place for everything. So now that we know when cortisol frees up glucose, we can understand how that would affect blood sugar. So do understand that so we just said your nervous system is affected because it perceives stress. Your nervous system is then affecting your hormones, adrenaline or norepinephrine or epinephrine, and cortisol. Well, what does that do? Well, it actually starts to then downregulate other hormones, right? So the nervous system affects the hormone system. So the downregulation would actually come from something like progesterone, and we would downregulate DHEA in the long term with chronic stress. And with chronic stress as well, we would downregulate testosterone production. And that's because your body's in more of a survival-based state, and it actually switches over now in the immune system to more of a Th2 dominant state. And that means that Th1 would be like your innate immune system. It's built up when you're a young child, and that's why we do have to expose our children to germs. It's okay. It's okay not to be hyper clean. It's actually worse in the long run. If your kids are outside and they're dirty, that's not a bad thing. I don't think that we should let them pick up things necessarily in the street and put them in their mouth, but we do want to expose them to microbes. It is actually okay for them to get sick. It's okay to not use antibiotics. Again, if it's a life-saving situation, then okay, understood. But it's okay for your child to be sick. It's very, very important. I'm not talking about deathly ill. I'm talking about a common cold, right? They have the sniffles, they have a cough. Now, you should use something like the Children's Immune Protocol that we recommend, a natural-based one. But I see too many people, again, it's not their fault, right? When your child's sick, you don't want them to be sick. You'd give anything for them to be healthy again. But understand that they're building up their innate immune system. They're going to be healthier when they're adults if they're allowed to allow their immune system to fight these pathogens. So important because what happens is then later in life, if we're under chronic stress or our immune system was never able to fight off the parasite, the candida, the gut bacteria overgrowth, or any type of intestinal permeability, our body can actually switch over to something called the Th2 branch of the immune system. Now, this is something that we get too exposed to. So, for example, a lot of times people eat, let's just say they're pecans, right? First time you eat pecans, no big deal. Or pecans, as some people say. The first time you eat them, no big deal. The second time, though, all of a sudden you have this reaction. You're like, I don't understand why. I've had them before. Well, your body gets primed, right? It's primed. But really, what we talk about in the Th2 branch of the immune system is that it's not going after the common cold and all those things. What it's looking at is chronic-based infection. It really has to do with chronic inflammation. It's allergies, and it's your body always fighting something. Many of the times, a predominant amount of the times, we see a lot of people with gut issues, right? Gut issues, because you're basically spilling proteins from each meal into there. There's candida overgrowth. Again, there's parasites. There's all sorts of things. And your immune system's always turned on. So you're always inflamed. And then that, of course, leads to the brain fog and the fatigue and all sorts of different things like joint pain that we don't necessarily think of. Like, oh, well, okay, this could be happening because my immune system, and the immune system could be flared up because of my gut. And my gut could even be flared up because of all this stress. So we always look at these specific things. And so again, I try to teach the health coaches on my team this as well, is that our foundational program addresses the nervous system, the endocrine system, which is the hormones, and it balances the immune system. If you do those things, you will get well. You will get well. Now, it's easier said than done. I'm not saying any of this is easy. And yes, easier said than done. However, it is done. We do this every single day of every single year, and that's why it's so important. And I never thought that I would actually teach to other practitioners all over the world, or just, again, the certification that we have coming out. And honestly, I'm going to be teaching this on the Cabral concept. So don't ever feel like you need to do the certification, but it will be for one person in every family. It will be for one person in every church and community so that they can teach others. And so that's the whole thing. But every day, I'll be teaching this in the Cabral concept. I just want to put it in one place. And I want to make that clear, is that all of my teaching is always going to be for free. It's always going to be out there. But there will be those people that want to be certified on a certain level that can then teach it to others. And that's obviously what I hope to do. But I can tell you right now, people ask, like, how are you different? Like, how are you going to be able to help me? It's like, well, first of all, I want to listen to your story. That's very important to me. I want to understand how you got here. And I want to see if one of the big ways in which we can help you is gut-based, as well as this neuroendoimmunology, right? So it's this nervous system affecting the endocrine system, affecting the immune system. It's so important. Okay, so we talked a lot about the negatives there, but I do want you to understand is when you start to spike cortisol, you are going to also then affect insulin. And over time, you can become insulin resistant. That's why I'm not going to say cortisol is going to make you put on a lot of body fat, but I will say the byproduct of high cortisol will have you put on a lot of body fat around that middle, right around the belly. And the reason is it's going to affect blood sugar, and it's going to affect the amount of insulin that you need to then produce. And at the same time, we're learning now, and actually this is going to be its own show, but if this is of interest to you, do stay tuned in the future, because I'm going to teach you how by spiking cortisol with stress, right? So stress spikes cortisol. It spikes blood sugar, which then increases insulin production, which then increases, which call this Th2 branch of the immune system, which creates inflammation, right? And this inflammation then, what else does it do? It increases more cortisol. What does more cortisol do? Increases more glucose. What does more glucose do? Increases insulin. And the cells become resistant, and you start to put on body fat. Now, again, I went through that really briefly. I'm going to break that down for you, and I'm going to teach you on an upcoming Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday exactly how stress actually puts on body fat and why some people literally cannot lose weight. They're eating a very small amount, probably too little, right? Because their body's even more stressed, and they might even be exercising too much and they can't lose weight, right? They're working their hardest, but they can't lose weight. This is one of those big reasons. So this is what we do. We work at a very finite level, a science-based level. Again, I'm a naturopath. I love Ayurvedic medicine. I love all of these things, but I look at everything. And using state-of-the-art science and functional medicine, orthomolecular medicine, and bioregulatory medicine is very important, right? So we look at all of those things. And of course, what do? Well, we lab test, right? We run what's called a thyroid adrenal hormone panel. And we can actually see how's the thyroid being affected by the adrenals. What's the blood sugar look like, the hemoglobin A1C and the insulin? We can run all of these numbers, and so can you. If you ever decide to, you can run that lab, and I will link it up today. You can do it right at home. Go to StephenCabral.com/921. If that interests you, of course, you can run it on your own. All right, so I talked about a lot of the negatives of caffeine, but how do you know if that's going to increase your blood pressure, right? A lot of people have chronic blood pressure, right? They should not be drinking caffeine. If you have high blood pressure, caffeine is just, you just cancel it out. You can't do it, okay? Get the blood pressure fixed and under control first, then you might be able to start to add some back in. We'll talk about when in the future, but obviously the first half of the day, because a normal cortisol curve is its highest spike between 6 and 8 in the morning. Then it starts to decrease the rest of the day, really dropping sharply by 12 p.m., right around lunchtime. Okay, so if you're going to have caffeine, of course, have it before 1 p.m. Very, very important. One other thing I do want to mention is that one of the ways that caffeine seems to be buffered, and I actually learned this from Ayurveda, so that's why I love I love Ayurveda, and I love all these forms of ancient-based medicine as well, is if that you have a cup of coffee after a meal, like they do in Europe for the most part, whether it's a small coffee or an espresso over in Europe, is that the caffeine is used for energy for digestion, and it's a little bit buffered because of the food already in your stomach. If you're going to have caffeine, I always recommend it after breakfast, and that's how I do it myself if I do choose to do it that day as well. And then let me give you a couple positives before I give you how much you should actually have per day. One of the really nice things about caffeine, though, is it increases cognitive performance, your ability to think. If I knew about the research, because I didn't even start drinking coffee till I was out of college. And again, it's kind of, I've had like a love-hate relationship with coffee. I love it. It hates me most of the time. But anyway, we'll talk about that. Is that you will actually improve your performance on test taking as long as you don't take too much. You'll improve your performance in sports. I mean, I was never going to go to the Olympics for anything. Trust me. I was never going to be a professional athlete in anything. But I was decent at sports, and I would have been a little bit better had I used caffeine actually a half hour to an hour before a race. Again, I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't even going to try out for the Olympics. But, everyone likes to be a little bit better, right? And performance-based, and caffeine is probably the number one thing you could do to actually boost performance, right? The mind-muscle connection, your body's ability to produce the correct hormones, which are cortisol during a fight or flight based situation, such as a performance or race. So pretty impressive. There are great results behind that. Of course, we talked about that cognitive decline as well, but it increases neurotransmitters. So for example, my adrenals aren't great with using a lot of caffeine. I know that. Like I have a very small amount I can, just for myself, I'll tell you, I can do about a mug's worth in the morning. So that would be about an 8-ounce cup of coffee. Now remember, that's a normal cup. You get 12 ounces with a tall, or a small at like a Starbucks. And then it goes to 16 and then 20. I believe that's the sizes. But that's still 1.5 cups. And if you're drinking a grande at Starbucks, that's 2 cups of coffee. So I just because you're drinking out of 1 cup doesn't make it 1 cup. It's considered 2 cups. So my sweet spot is 1 mug. It's 8 ounces. That would be a half a coffee for most people. And again, it's not a Starbucks. It's just an organic coffee that I've recommended brands in the past. I'll talk about more in the future. But here's why it helps me. When you drink that cup of coffee, it's going to increase certain neurotransmitters such as dopamine. It increases serotonin by anywhere between 26 and 30% or 33%. So anywhere between a quarter and a third more serotonin you'll produce, which is why people feel a lot of times happier. They say, I feel like a new person when they drink it, right? GABA, which can be anti-anxiety. But again, you drink too much coffee, well, you get anxious. There are different mechanisms, and that's because caffeine actually competes in the liver and in other cell receptors with other neurotransmitters. I'll go into that in the future as well, because that could go on a tangent right there. But remember, anything you put in your body does compete with other things. So it's very, very important that we don't want to flood our body with caffeine and affect our liver as well. So the other, it increased GABA by about 2/3. Really, really impressive. I mean, that's a lot more GABA. The next is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine I've spoken about on a previous Friday review. So check that out on choline in general. Really great for the brain and for cognitive performance. We spoke about that. So a lot of times when you produce more of these neurotransmitters, you will feel more alive. You will feel more awake and you will be happier. So when I have a small, and I'm talking small, anything more than that, because I'm already amped up, right? You might catch that a little bit. I have good energy. Now, again, I used to have chronic fatigue and Addison's disease. I not only didn't have energy, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. Meaning like it's next level. You feel like you have the flu all the time. I could barely move. And it took me until about 11 a.m. to even feel like I didn't have any brain fog. But now all of that's gone. And that's because I have rebalanced my body. I've understood too what works for me and what doesn't. Like all these things matter. Well, caffeine and coffee is one of those things. I get the most out of it if it's hot. So if I drink 1 small cup of hot coffee, Typically black, or I might put in a little bit of macadamia nut milk or something like that, but typically just black, not sugar, just in there black. And it's always after breakfast, never before, because if you put coffee on an empty stomach, you are going to hyperstimulate your nervous system. That is not what I need. That is not a good thing. I might feel great. I might feel like I go run a marathon after that, but that's not what you want. That's anxious-based energy. That's not cool, calm, and collected energy, right? Calm and alert. I want calm and alert, okay? Even though I might talk quick and move quick and all of those things, if I took my heart rate, I would still be good, right? I would still be level. So what I get is the neurotransmitter boost that I want from an organic black coffee at a small amount after breakfast. And again, for me, I am typically having a bowl of oatmeal and I'm also having a smoothie, right? That's what I do for my breakfast. Most people, a smoothie is going to be enough. They're not looking to put on weight. They're not looking for any of those things. I do have a pretty active day, right? I'm going for a good 12 hours. And for me, that oatmeal seems to work great. Plus, it works phenomenally well for my cholesterol levels and overall energy as well. And again, I'll go into my body type in future episodes too. So what I can tell you is this, is that for most people, and again, you're going to have to experiment with this. The bottom line is this, for most people, you should run your thyroid adrenal hormone lab test, right? Because that's going to tell you where you're at. And you can also run what's called a hair tissue mineral analysis. That will tell you as well what your electrolyte status is like. If you're burnt out and you have lower levels of cortisol, lower levels of DHEA, lower levels of testosterone, taking more caffeine will only get you into more of an artificial energy-based state. What your body really needs is to recuperate first. That's the important thing. And then afterwards, you might be able to use a little bit of caffeine, but not before. However, if I run your thyroid adrenal hormone report, your thyroid looks good, your cortisol looks good, your DHEA, your testosterone, your progesterone look good, then I'm okay if you enjoy coffee and you do want to do a cup after breakfast in the morning, right? For most people, they'll never need that afternoon cup. It's honestly going to be a little too stimulating, and for the most part, they should figure out if they have low energy in the afternoon, why is it? Is it poor digestion at lunch? Too heavy of a meal? Is it a lack of B vitamins? Is it a lack of vitamin C? Is it a lack of anything, right? Because it could be a lack of minerals and a lack of vitamins. So that's more important to actually test out. That's my recommendation. And the last part is this, is actually on a genetic-based test. And I'll link up the genetic test in today's show notes at stephencabral.com/921 as well. But there's actually a marker, and it's right around, it's like only like 14 or 15 pages in on the lab test that we use. The lab test that we use is literally, it's one of the best ones. It's not one of the best. It's the best one in the world right now. And again, when there's a better one that comes out, we'll switch to that. That's how we work. We use the best of the best. We don't own any of these labs. Well, they actually test a marker. It's the CYP1A2, and the RS SNP on it, the RS ID, is 762551. You can actually just look those up if you want to actually look up what that means specifically. But it just shows you if you're a slow caffeine metabolizer or a fast caffeine metabolizer. Because besides just your body type, some people process caffeine really well. It's in and out of their system pretty quickly. It doesn't really affect insomnia or anxiety or anything with them. That would be more of a fast processor of caffeine. A slow processor, a slow metabolizer of caffeine just means that it stays in their system longer, and it could make it more difficult to sleep at night. For those people, definitely no caffeine after breakfast coffee or whatever they choose to have. Now, again, you could have black tea. Black tea is going to have around 70 milligrams of caffeine, so it's still going to have a decent amount, about the same size as a small cup of coffee, or espresso, I should say. It could even have more. Again, you have to look for the concentration of these things. So some people can say, oh, my coffee has more or less. Yes, it depends on how strong you are making your coffee if you're making it at home. You can make an 8-ounce cup with 3 tablespoons of coffee grounds, right? So, or coffee grounds, whatever it is. You can obviously make it much, much stronger. So I will tell you this, is that I recommend for most people, if they don't know where they're at, I would love for them to wean down on the caffeine. I want to link up, because I know that this is going to be a lot for you to go back and check on, but I did a previous podcast on how to wean off caffeine. I would love for you to listen to that episode. Again, if you can't find it, just go to stephencabral.com/podcast and type in wean off caffeine. And it will teach you how to go from whatever you're drinking right now to at least half that in about 2 weeks. Okay. It will teach you how to basically, you're not going to dilute it. You'll still drink the same size. So your brain thinks you're getting the same amount of caffeine, and you'll slowly begin to bring it down with a little bit of decaf. But again, I talk about that which types of decaf to use on that episode, because it should be that Swiss water processed decaf so that you're not using any type of ethanol or any type of nasty chemical-based processors to remove the caffeine. Because again, more does not equal better. More typically equals more nervous system stress, which equals an increase in cortisol and adrenaline production, which decreases your testosterone, your DHEA, all your positive hormones for both men and women. And then it begins to affect your immune system and inflammation over time. So my recommendation is this, I'm not going to tell you exactly how much coffee to drink for you. What I would like to say is definitely don't drink more than 2 to 3 cups per day. Ideally, no more than 2, because there's a lot more you can do for cognitive decline than simply drink coffee, that's for sure. And what I would love for you to do is begin to try to get it to just 1 cup per day, all right? And 1 cup is, again, 8 ounces, maybe 12 at the most, okay? That's what 1 cup actually is. If you need more than that, look into why you may be so tired. What are your vitamin deficiencies? You can find that on an organic acids test. What are your mineral deficiencies? You can find that on a hair tissue mineral analysis. And what are the hormone deficiencies? You can find that on an adrenal hormone test or a thyroid adrenal hormone test. Again, you never have to run any of these if you don't want, but it would give you more of that data. Ideally for me, I would just love you to begin to cut back on it. Again, there are many benefits to caffeine and to coffee, and I'm not going to deny those. What I don't want us to do is sacrifice our long-term health and energy for the short-term now of basically spiking our adrenals, spiking those hormones, and beginning to wear down our immune system. Because remember, it is only over time, over months and years, that we begin to fill up our rain barrel. And when that happens, all of a sudden we begin to be in that dis-ease state. We have the cancer, we have all of these different types of things. They never happen overnight. If we begin to work on these small changes today, well, those small changes also add up in the same way. They begin to empty your rain barrel, and over time, you become a healthier and happier human being. Hopefully today's episode was helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If this show is helpful, feel free to pass it along to anyone else you believe it may serve. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.